Allison. I'm a literacy specialist, and in this video, I'm going to explain what you should leave out of, meaning not include, in your small group time. I'll also talk about the flip side of that, what you should include. Before we dive in, if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, go ahead and do that now, and then also hit the little bell so that you don't miss out on any of the brand new videos I post about teaching literacy. Small group lessons can be such an important opportunity to work with kids more closely, to differentiate, to meet their needs. But at the same time, I feel like no part of the day flies by more quickly than small group time, right? And you can end up feeling really rushed and like you're struggling to fit everything in. If you have ever felt rushed during small group time, I would love for you to type rushed in the comments just so that other teachers know that they are not alone. If you're struggling to fit it all in, you're not the only one by any means. It really can be difficult. And that's because there's probably a ton of skills that you're trying to fit in, especially if you teach like K2. You might be trying to fit in phonological awareness, phonics, high frequency words, building fluency, maybe some vocabulary, maybe some language or reading comprehension, writing, oral language. Like, oh my gosh, right? And there's not a lot of time. So how do you fit this all in? And really importantly, what do you leave out? Because it's just not possible to fit all of it in. When there's so much that I want to fit into small groups and realistically it's just not working, there's a couple of questions I ask myself to weed out and figure out like, what am I going to include in small groups? Because you can't include everything. One question I ask myself is, what are the skills that most need to be differentiated? So for example, if I have a class of kids and they're all over the place in terms of their phonics knowledge, then I'm going to want to include at least some phonics instruction in my small group so that I can truly differentiate and meet their needs. Another question I ask myself is, with what skills or with what types of literacy tasks do my students tend to need the most support? So for example, let's say that, you're having the kids read decodable text and they're all reading maybe the same text or different text, whole group. But there's a lot of kids that need help. Well, it doesn't make as much sense and it's not going to be as effective for me to start like darting around the classroom trying to help everybody or many kids. It would make more sense for me to just have them read decodable text in small group. So those are two important questions. Number one, which skills most need to be differentiated? And then number two, with which types of literacy tasks or skills do my kids tend to need the most support? Because then in small group, you're right there to more directly help them. Now, if you're pulling skills out of what you might want to put in small group, then it has to go in whole group, right? And I think sometimes whole group instruction gets a bad reputation, but it can actually be highly, highly effective, okay? So certain skills, like maybe teaching high frequency words or reviewing past skills, maybe writing, maybe some phonological awareness work, a lot of that can go into whole group. And again, anything else that you feel like your kids don't need as much differentiation with or as much individual support with, that can go in a whole group setting. It doesn't mean that you're not differentiating, but it just means that for the sake of efficiency, these are some skills that you can cover in whole group. Another thing to think about is if you find yourself in small group teaching the same lesson over and over again, that's a signal that this is something that maybe could be taught whole group, like where you do the actual instruction and modeling. And then perhaps kids are practicing with you in small group, but that initial instruction happens whole group because it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to repeat yourself over and over again to all these different groups. I think we also have to be really flexible in our thinking about what goes in small group, because just because maybe last year you did it one way, that doesn't mean that the kids in front of you need the same skills included in their small groups. We kind of have to look at it every year with somewhat fresh eyes, right? Like there may be certain things that every year, like you're reading decodable text with them in a small group setting, like that totally makes sense. But some other things, are really going to depend on the kids in front of you and what they have and have not mastered. Another thing, and this is totally okay, I understand if you've ever had anxiety about, doing it this way, but it is okay for some small groups to focus on certain skills and other small groups to focus on different skills. So let's say that you're teaching first grade or even second grade, and you've got some kids that are really still working on cracking the code of reading, and they need a lot of decoding work and a lot of phonics work and phonemic awareness. But then you've got some kids that are very fluent readers. It is okay to work on, yes, building fluency, but also to really focus on comprehension and maybe making meaning from text with the group that's at that point. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't do comprehension with the lower group, but it does mean that with these other groups that are working more on decoding, most of your lesson is going to be spent getting them to decode, and that is okay. It is okay to work on different types of skills with different groups. The other thing with flexibility is like maybe, you're teaching writing at the beginning of the year in a whole group setting, but you see that they're really struggling. So maybe you don't stop teaching writing whole group, but then later on in the year, you're doing a little bit more writing during your small groups. So not only should it be flexible from group to group, but it should also be flexible across the year. Okay. So flexibility is really key here. But at the same time, you don't want to lose sight of the big picture, because you want to make sure that regardless of whether it's covered in small group or whole group, there are certain buckets of skills that you spend an appropriate amount of time on. So in my Science of Reading course, what I did is I broke down for you by grade level. I did kindergarten, first grade, and second grade, like how long to spend on each skill. And then I also broke it down by like how much of that time should be teacher-led and guided practice versus independent practice. And that can also help you understand what to put in whole group versus small group, because depending upon the reality of the number of minutes that you have in your schedule, you may find like, oh, I have to teach this whole group so that kids get the appropriate number of minutes of instruction. That's why looking at it like holistically and all the different skill buckets and minutes for them can be really helpful in determining what you're going to cover in small groups. This can be a lot to think about. So in my course, I also gave you these small group schedules, and I broke them down into different sheets. There's like, schedules and suggested activity lists for like kids that aren't decoding yet, versus kids that are semi-fluent versus kids that are fluent. And so based upon their skill level, I broke down what skills you would be working on with them typically in those groups. So that makes it a lot easier on you, because yes, of course, think about like the skills as a whole and what your particular situation is and what your students need. But that way you can really get down to the nitty-gritty of like, which skills should I prioritize for each group depending upon the level that that group is at. So that is going to make it a lot easier for you too. If you're interested in learning more about my Science of Reading course, and by the way, those like small group schedules and the overall, structured literacy schedules for all the skills, that's just one small part of it. It's actually about making the Science of Reading teacher friendly and showing you what are these concepts that you should follow and keep in mind to follow the Science of Reading, but actually what does that look like on a daily basis? And I have lots more detailed daily schedules for you, not just small group, but whole group as well. So if you're interested in all of that, I will include a link in the caption to this video. And of course, feel free to ask any questions that you have. Thanks so much for watching. I hope that this was helpful. Before you leave, don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe, and I will see you in my next video.